We are so happy that you're with us tonight on Sharia Crime Stoppers webinars on Tuesday nights. This is going to be a really power-packed evening with some information you may not have heard at all. There might be some scoops coming on tonight. We are part of the United West, and we're happy to be continuing our fall webinar series. Tonight we have Mary on the questions. Good evening, Mary.
Hi, Dick. How are you?
Mary will be entertaining us with comments as well as taking care of the questions. You all know how to do it, the Q&A button at the bottom. We have to, again, thank you for growing our audience. It is growing week to week. And as we get ready for next year, we need it to continue to grow because it's going to be a tough year. And a person who's going to give us some inside information tonight is Phillip Haney. Good evening, Phillip.
Good evening. Thank you, everybody. Glad to be here.
So, Phillip, everybody knows, hopefully knows, that you're officially a whistleblower, and that you were Fox News talking about important things, that you wrote a book, See Something, Say Nothing. Why don't you give us, just for some of the people who may not know, maybe start with the picture on the right side of the screen, and what were you doing there, and give a little bit about your background before we jump into your commentary.
Well, I think that might have been when I was on Megyn Kelly. The first time I ever went public, no pressure whatsoever. I'm only on Fox News with the primetime talk show host Megyn Kelly telling the entire country that the narrative about the San Bernardino attacks, as the Obama administration was promoting it, was false. That there really was a design behind the attack, and that there was a particular group called Tablighi Jamaat that was involved. And of course, what would have happened to my public career if I had been wrong? That would have been it for me, because the Department of Homeland Security, they said, we're not going to comment except to say that his story is full of holes. Well, you just did comment. But my story wasn't full of holes. Weeks later, it was verified by the FBI that it actually was Tablighi Jamaat. So I said something that essentially virtually nobody knew. And why in the world would I know that? Why am I so special? It's not that I was so special. It just so happens that I worked at the National Targeting Center in Washington, D.C. on the very case called the Tablighi Jamaat Initiative that pointed me in that direction. And this is the very case that Hillary Clinton, and I said that specifically, Hillary Clinton, and Janet Napolitano, who was Secretary of Homeland Security, intruded into the law enforcement arena and shut the case down, the Tablighi Jamaat case. And it led to people dying. And that's why I'm so adamant about this. I wish I could talk about gardening and green beans and tomatoes and how beautiful it is here in California, even during the power outage. But no, because this whole issue has not been resolved to this day, and that's basically what we're going to talk about today. If anything, and this is a hard statement for me to make, it's worse now than it even was during the Obama administration. And I know people are going to say, what? That can't be possible. President Trump is in. Well, one way to look at it is just imagine how much worse it would be if President Trump wasn't in. But even with his presence and in the administration we have now, the saturation level of the Islam, is particularly Muslim Brotherhood, but not only, is actually worse, broader and deeper now than it was even during my time active duty in the Department of Homeland Security. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight.
Phillip, why don't you get your presentation up while we chat for a minute? The picture on the right also was in addition to that, you're testifying at a hearing in 2016 before a committee titled, I believe you're looking at willful blindness at that time. And I think we commented earlier off the air that you would think with that kind of exposure that you provided your country, things would have gotten better, and they've gotten worse. So we're going to invite you to give us the latest on maybe willful blindness or whatever else is driving definite blindness.
Mm-hmm. And another thing we talked about off camera before the show started that I've just remembered to mention is that I could actually give you a parallel presentation to this one, which is all based on available open source information, right? I could actually put one right side by side that would be classified. Which means what? Why would I bring that up? Because the level of saturation is even deeper than what I can show in an open source presentation. But it also implies that this information ought to be, and actually is known within law enforcement circle, but that the previous administration basically crashed a tank through the walls of our agency and destroyed a lot of our capacity to protect our national security and our border. That's why I call it national security meltdown. So just keep in mind that if I had the opportunity, I was sitting before the Intel Committee or the House Committee on Homeland Security or the Judiciary Committee, both on the House or the Senate side, not to mention the cabinet or President Trump himself, I could actually show even more detail of this than what we're going to see tonight.
Okay, well, I think that's a key message. Everything you're looking at tonight, everybody, is public source information. That means you can hear it, you can see it. It also means that the people who go to work in Washington, D.C. can see it and hear it if they choose to and ask for more information. So Phillip, why don't you dive in and get started, and we'll invite people to submit questions for analysis at the end.
Okay, and this is going to be available on the website, right?
Yes.
So everybody that's watching it can go and find the original sources. You don't have to fumble around for it. It's all right there, one-stop shopping. So let's go ahead and get started. As you see, the title of the presentation tonight is National Security Meltdown. I'm calling it Islamic Saturation. I'm going to be mainly focusing on the Muslim Brotherhood, but there are other Islamic groups that are saturated into the structure of our government, and that would include Hezbollah, and it would also include elements from Turkey under Erdogan. So let me go ahead. These are the different parts of the federal government that the Muslim Brotherhood is saturated into. We'll look at the FBI. I'm going to give you examples of each one of these. And the reason why I didn't put them in alphabetical order is because this is the order of the slideshow. I put it in chronological order because I have found it's easier to follow a story when it's put in chronological order. So in chronologically, the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamic groups began the saturation into federal government through the FBI, and then into Congress, and after that academia, and then after that the military, and then into my former agency, DHS, and then into the United States State Department of State, and then into the faith community. And by this time, it's obvious we're out of the federal government. We're out into the community now. And then last, it's actually saturating, lapping on the toes of the White House itself. And again, I know people might say, what? You got to be kidding me. That can't really be true. Please tell me that you're just exaggerating. Well, I wish I was. And I also want to mention that there is hope. There are things that we can do. If there wasn't hope, then there wouldn't be much of a reason for me to really bring this to light, would there? If it was already past hope and past resolution, past a solution, then why would I want to bring it up? So yes, I am hopeful. It's sobering, it's discouraging, it's troubling, but it's not hopeless. So we're going to start, as I mentioned, with the FBI. And going back clear to the year 2003, the Muslim Public Affairs Council, that's MPAC, which later I'll show you, is a direct outgrowth of the Muslim Brotherhood out of Orange County, California, met with Robert Mueller and other members of the FBI in Washington, D.C. And it says right here on the screen, during a 90-minute meeting, MPAC offered 10 points to enhance the partnership between American Muslim organizations and law enforcement, and 2 suggestions to work jointly with media. So they got all the bases covered. Remember, this isn't that long after 9/11. And by this time, This wasn't the first time that they had met with Robert Mueller and the FBI. And isn't it interesting that Robert Mueller's name surfaces so prominently all those years later when he is in charge of the investigation on collusion with Russia against the Trump administration? And also down here near the bottom, it says the Islamic Society of North America Representative Muhammad Majid Ali also endorsed MPAC's stand and expressed a desire to work jointly with MPAC to facilitate implementation of these points at the local level. Doesn't it all sound nice? But this is the Muslim Brotherhood, friends. Now this is 2003. This is before the Holy Land Foundation, that trial was concluded in November. We're coming up on the anniversary of it, of 2008. So, okay, we'll cut everybody a little bit of slack. This is 2003. 5 years before the Holy Land trial, so I'll be nice. We'll cut him some slack. But there's going to come a point in the presentation, we're going to come up to that point of 2008, and then we're going to go past it, and then you're going to begin to ask yourself, well, you cut him some slack before, but what about after the trial? We should know better. And that's why I say that in some ways it's worse now than it was during Obama, the saturation, because we should know better. It's like the seatbelt principle. If you get in an accident and you're not wearing your seatbelt and you survive it, that's bad. But if you go back out and start driving around again and get in another accident without, and this time you're still not wearing your seatbelt, that's a whole different story. You didn't learn anything from the first experience you had. And so that's why I call it worse, because by this time we should have known better. We should have had our seatbelt on as we're driving around, because there's more than enough evidence. I'm not the only one that's been trying to bring this to light, at great risk, by the way. So here we go, fast forward for about 5 years, and we're up to 2008 now. This is right before the conclusion of the Holy Land trial, which was held in Dallas by the Department of Justice. Yep, the same Department of Justice that became an active supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood not very long after this. This is the famous memo where it talks about the FBI not working with CARE. So right now, before the trial's even concluded, FBI has already been notified that they can no longer work with CARE. So is that the way things remain? Is that the way they are now? No. You're going to see that the FBI is working very closely with CARE in October of 2019. So here we go now. I mentioned this earlier. This is just the icon of the Muslim Brotherhood, of the Holy Land Foundation. So this trial was concluded November 25th, 2008. That's Thanksgiving Day. And something else significant happened during the month of November 2008. As you might remember, it was called an election, and we elected a new president. His name is Barack Hussein Obama. And this is really, if you want to look at a smoking gun moment in the history of our country regarding national security and border protection, this would be it. The month of November in 2008, which is what now, almost 11 years ago. This is the moment when we came right up to the threat that we were facing and actually touched it. We came right up to the Holy Land Foundation and the network of organizations and front groups operating in the United States, identified them, shut one of the major ones down, made a long list of other organizations and individuals, as we call unindicted co-conspirators, and then turned around and walked away from it. And that's the status of it to this day. The second phase of the Holy Land trial has never been followed through. And that was because we had a change in administration, and we elected a president and an administration from the DOJ on down that rather than approaching the threat we face from a law enforcement orientation, they began to address it from what they call civil rights and civil liberties, countering violent extremism. And that's where the famous or infamous phrase, see something, say something, came from. Where we're no longer going to enforce immigration law, we're not going to do the screening and the counterterrorism work. We're going to decide that if we're just friends with them, that they'll be friends with us, and the threat of terrorism will diminish. So here, the day after the election, the verdict with the Holy Land, CARE comes out, and rather than doing what they always say they do, which is supporting American values, they come out and say that the Holy Land Foundation verdict is based on fear-mongering. Oh, there's nothing really to it. It's all fear-mongering. And this is going to fast forward too into October of 2019, because now the new focus of DHS is not counterterrorism as much as it now has become white supremacy. This is kind of a precursor. Oh, they're just fear-mongering out of Islamophobia and racist. There's no basis for their fear of Islam, and they're just arresting and putting these people in the jail because there's nothing really there. And that's how they portrayed it. Of course, there really was something there. These individuals who were convicted are still in jail to this very day, and the Holy Land Foundation was responsible for somewhere between $12 and $60 million worth of support, direct financial support to Hamas, which is a globally designated terrorist organization and remains so to this very day. Now here is when things start to really get gnarly. Now back here we're at 2008. Now we fast forward another 5 years. Remember, I'm active duty this whole time. I was a founding member of the Department of Homeland Security, right clear back before Impact started meeting with Robert Mueller. That was March 1st, 2003 is when the Department of Homeland Security was inaugurated. I was there literally on the first day, already been in federal service for more than a year before then. The agency was inaugurated March 1st, 2003. MPAC is already meeting, Muslim Brotherhood is already meeting with officials in the law enforcement branches like FBI and DOJ. Here comes our agency in 2003, and then 10 years later, look at this very carefully. This is a written statement of the Council on American Islamic Relations, a front group for Hamas, on what? The Boston Marathon bombings. They called it a first look. Submitted to who? The United States House Committee on Homeland Security, May 9th, 2013. Remember, the bombings in Boston were April 15th. So this is like not even a month. And the Department of Homeland Security under Mike McCall, Texas House member, chairman of the House Committee, had hearings on the Boston Marathon bombing. And they solicited, meaning requested, that CARE would submit an official analysis or official briefing on the Boston Marathon. I talked directly with the vice chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security, Jeff Duncan from South Carolina. And I told him directly to his face that they had a Trojan horse inside their committee. And he looked at me and said, "Why? How can you say that?" I said, "Because CARE submitted a report to your committee. CARE is a front group for Hamas. The only way that CARE would ever submit a report like this is if they were requested to, if it was solicited. That means somebody in your committee asked them to do it. And that's why you have a Trojan horse in your committee. And that is what, how many years ago was that? 6 years. So here's an example of the Muslim Brotherhood being saturated into Congress. And you might think, well, that was the end of it. It got better, right? No. Here I found out was where the Trojan horse was coming from. This is about 2 years later after that. To Mustafa Carroll and the Council on American Islamic Relations, the moderate Muslim is our most effective weapon. Mike McCall, chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security, Texas District 10. Mustafa Carroll is the leader of CARE in Texas. So why? Please tell me. Keeping in mind now, chronologically, this is 7 years-ish after the Holy Land trial had been completed, and we'd already proven that CARE was one of the front groups for Hamas. So why would the chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security be meeting with the leader of an organization that was already proven in federal court to be directly connected to Hamas? Please, somebody explain that. Well, I kept asking that question, including to Mike McCall himself in person, eye to eye. And the fruit of my labors was that I ended up getting investigated by my own colleagues within my own agency, Internal Affairs of CBP, the Department of Homeland Security, Inspector General, and the Department of Justice, who convened a grand jury to find probable cause to indict me on criminal charges for pointing out inconvenient facts like, wait a minute, why is Mike McCall meeting with a member of CARE, who we know. Meanwhile, we go forward a little bit, and everywhere you turn, you find CARE, and they're always objecting to something. Here, in this case, they're objecting to a billboard that says, Muslims to Muslims, see something, say something. Save innocent lives. They don't even like that. Even though the Obama administration paid them money to be model communities in the city of Boston, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and LA, California, when it was all said and done, they turned around and betrayed the very administration that supported them and said that the See Something, Say Something campaign was biased, discriminatory, and that it counterproductive and racist, and denounced the entire program. So anytime you bring Muslim activities into the public light, one of these Muslim Brotherhood front groups is going to rise up and make a big stink about it. Most of the time, it's CARE. Occasionally, it's other groups, but CARE is like the frontline activists. They're out there at street level, making sure that they put a stop to any attempt to examine the real motives of, let's say, Islamic extremism. So now, fast forward to 2018. Now we're getting into real recent times. This is like not quite a year ago. The IPT, the Investigative Project for Terrorism, put out a list of what? 102 members of Congress who written letters to CARE on official stationery. Just like this one I have here for an example. There are 102 members of the House. Now this was a year ago. And as I go forward, you're going to see another slide to show now we've discovered, and I'm trying to find the source of it, another cache of letters. This is a year later, meaning now, of 125 letters that have been written to CARE from members of Congress in commemoration of their upcoming 25th annual banquet. They're going to celebrate their 25th birthday, and they're going to have this banquet in Washington, D.C. on the 9th of November, about, 12 days from now. And 125 different members of Congress have written letters congratulating CARE on their 25-year anniversary. So we have two caches of letters written by members of Congress. And another thing to keep in mind, these are the very same members of Congress who are right now attempting to impeach the president. So we have members of Congress who are supporting Hamas while they're at the same time attempting to impeach the president. That's why I call it a national security meltdown. Here's a screenshot of the pending banquet, and look at some of the luminaries that are going to be speaking. I know you all are aware of Linda Sarsour, and you also, I think you probably all heard of Ilhan Omar too. Well, they're two of the women that are speaking at this event. And what's the title of it? Defending, Educating, and Empowering, Building the Next Generation of American Muslims. This is front group for Hamas. I have to keep saying that. And that members of Congress who write letters in support of CARE or another Muslim Brotherhood front group like IMPAC or ISNA are supporting Hamas. And they need to be held accountable for this. They need to be challenged on this. And that'll be one thing everybody watching and listening can do. You can write a letter and you can make a phone call. Once I get done with this presentation and you get a hold of the PowerPoint, go to the sources where these letters, where I found them, look them up yourself and look up which ones of them are your representatives and give them a phone call. I mean, like tomorrow. So meanwhile, we hear undercurrents that President Trump is considering designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. Well, this bubbles up to the surface every so often. There's some debate, even within our circle, within our alliance, about whether the Muslim Brotherhood qualifies under technical rules to be designated as a terrorist group. But I can tell you that other countries in other parts of the world, particularly in the Middle East, who know the Muslim Brotherhood quite well, have already taken a step to designate them, including President al-Sisi from Egypt, who is hoping that President Trump is going to back him up and designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist group here in America. And if we didn't designate the Muslim Brotherhood, maybe we could reinstate the Holy Land Foundation trial. And if we didn't reinstate the Holy Land Foundation trial, part 2, maybe we could look into some of the deeper level activities of these front groups that are still, to this very day, connected to Hamas and other front groups, global level, that are supporting the jihad in a lot of different places around the world. My point is, there's plenty that we can do. We don't have to just sit here and take it passively until, God forbid, something bad happens, and then maybe we react at that point and wring our hands and try to ask ourselves, oh gosh, now what can we do? No, there's a lot that we can do. Now, I mentioned that they're saturated in academia, and this is just one example of the Institute for Islamic Education, called the Barzinji Project, that is coupled with colleges right in Virginia called Shenandoah University. Now, the IIIE, the International Institute for Islamic Education, is a very well-known front group. It's actually not funny, pitiful actually. It's about 1.5 miles from the NTC, where I call the secret squirrel headquarters of DHS, near Reston, Virginia. At least it used to be there. About 1.5 miles from that is the headquarters of one of the biggest branches of the Muslim Brotherhood in the whole United States, right next door to each other. And they're forming partnerships with schools and coming in, saturating in, providing education that is pro-Islamic, pro-Muslim Brotherhood, and having influence on the lives of these young students. I also mentioned that the Muslim Brotherhood, in this case CARE, had forced itself or saturated itself into the Department of Defense. And this is an infamous case just quite recently in June of this year, where they forced the cancellation of a speech presentation by Raymond Ibrahim, out of all places, the U.S. Army War College. The U.S. Army War College chose to allow themselves to be intimidated and coerced by a front group for Hamas and cancel the speech by one of the best well-known Arab-speaking scholars of Islamic theology and the global Islamic movement in the whole world, Raymond Ibrahim. Now, that's a lot of influence. Now we're getting into really current times. This is where the rubber is really starting to meet the road now, because on June 28th of this year, Muslim Public Affairs Council was invited to participate in a workshop called Protecting Houses of Worship. And it says down here in the highlighted part in the left pane of the slide that we will be advising the Department of Homeland Security and other law enforcement agencies on how to best protect Muslim communities and other religious groups. Then you go to the top of the right-hand pane. It says our role in this limited scope subcommittee. Limited scope subcommittees means they were chosen particularly to be part of this emerging policy to highlight the external threats posed by violent, white supremacist groups against our houses of worship and communities. They're going to be asking for more money, more law enforcement, and a real strong focus on white supremacist violence against all Americans. And who do they say in this next highlighted paragraph? In order to send a comprehensive and inclusive report to DHS, there's another report coming, we will be collaborating with organizations like CARE and Muslim leaders across the U.S. to ensure that the recommendations we provide are diverse and includes the impact on vulnerable communities. We aim to serve each part of our community's needs. This is blatant. This is why I say it's worse. I documented 150 meetings between the Obama administration and groups like IMPACT, ISNA, Islamic Society of North America, and CARE during the time of President Obama's term in office. We already know, which I'll show you in a sec here. By the way, that circle on the right of the slide, that's the FBI. So the DHS is partnering up with the FBI. But wait a minute, I thought the FBI wasn't supposed to be working with CARE. Way back as long as 2009, that's 10 years ago. Well, why is CARE emerging back into the picture along with IMPACT and being invited to participate in the development of a new policy focused on white supremacy, when we already know from 10 years ago they're part of the Muslim Brotherhood and that they're affiliated with Hamas? So here's a little bit of background on IMPACT in case anybody listening isn't quite sure that IMPACT really does come from the Muslim Brotherhood. They were founded by two brothers, the Hatha brothers, who immigrated here from Egypt. And they were very outspoken. They weren't shy one little bit about saying that they were members of the Muslim Brotherhood. They come from Orange County, California, the Islamic Center of Southern California, which is a hot spot out in the west of the Muslim Brotherhood activity, just like the Islamic Society of Boston is a hot spot on the East Coast, and that they're directly derived from Muslim Brotherhood. So it's not a mystery. And here's Majid Ali, the guy on the right, with, I'm sure you all recognize who that person is, Comey. James Comey, another one of the people that are out after to try to destroy President Trump's presidency. So this is the former president of the Islamic Society of North America, Majid Ali, who is also on the advisory committee sorry for stuttering. He's on the advisory committee of the Assembly of Muslim Jurists for America, which is called Majama Fuqaha al-Sharia bi-Amrikia in Arabic. And these are the promoters of Sharia. This is basically the sun that the whole Muslim community orbits around in North America. And the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America, AMJA, is what the acronym is. That's Majid Ali. Why is he standing next to James Comey? I thought they weren't supposed to be working with these people. So where's the disconnect? That's why I call it saturation. Now here we are in the faith community. This is July 17th, 2019. And there's this whole movement called the Alliance of Virtue for the Common Good, which is an initiative begun by the Muslim Brotherhood out of Jordan in the year 2006. It used to be called the Common Word. Now it's called Alliance of Virtue for the Common Good. And if you look at the highlighted places, people down at the bottom, you'll see Imam Majid. He's the Imam of the Dulles Adams Center there in Al Dulles area Muslim Society Center outside of Washington, D.C., allied with David Saperstein and Bob Roberts, a Baptist pastor, but led by this guy up here, Sheikh bin Baya, who is a high-level person in the Muslim Brotherhood who lives in Saudi Arabia. They've come right into what is called the ministerial, which is an effort generated out of the State Department to help protect persecuted Christians. So how is it that these people have managed to saturate themselves right into even this part of our social structure? In this case, it's out of the State Department, but it's supposed to be protecting Christians from persecution. And the very people that are doing the persecuting are sitting in the position of authority. And here's CARE. They were going to be partnering with the Census Bureau, and that's as of August 28, 2019. But IPT with Stephen Emerson put the word out, and thank the Lord, somebody actually listened, and they canceled the proposed affiliation between CARE and the 2020 census. And this is one of the reasons why I say there's hope, because with the properly directed focus and effort, there is a chance that people in the administration actually will listen and reconsider. And this is one example of it. However, here you have September 6th, 2019. You have the USCMO, see in blue, USCMO. That's the U.S. Council on Muslim Organizations. The guy second from the right is Nihad Awad. The guy next to him is Osama Jamal. These are all high-level Muslim Brotherhood leaders. These are the top of the whole United States. The U.S. Council of Muslim Organizations is the largest coalition of leading national and local Muslim organizations. What are they doing at the State Department? Meeting with officials from the State Department on our policy regarding Kashmir. You know, there's a big conflict going on right now between India and Pakistan over the status of what's called Jammu and Kashmir. And the USCMO is coming in on the side of Pakistan, advocating for the position that Pakistan takes, that Jammu and Kashmir should be part of their territory, not part of India. It's a potential huge conflict. But the point is why is the Muslim Brotherhood even allowed to come within 50 feet of the U.S. State Department? But they are. And as I said to you earlier when I first started, if I could show you classified information on every single one of the people in this picture, you really would be horrified. And you would be asking me, who in the world is doing the vetting? And where is the disconnect between, let's say, the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security, the law enforcement branch of the federal government? How come they're not talking to each other? Why is it these people that have known connections and ties to terrorist activity through the Muslim Brotherhood and front groups and organizations like Hamas allowed to go in and sit shoulder to shoulder with people that are in the State Department in real time? This isn't years ago, this is last month. And here's this same task force that I was mentioning to you before. Now here's the new emerging strategy. The official policy of the Department of Homeland Security, dated September 20th, 2019, endorsed by McAleenan, who was the Secretary of Homeland Security but just resigned about 2 weeks ago. And on the left, I just put this in to mention that we're not the only country that's having this problem of trying to tell the difference between our left hand and our right hand. They're having the same problem in the UK. They're shifting their focus from counterterrorism to what they consider a greater threat, which is white supremacy. Then the point is, who is going to be the arbiter of what a white supremacist is? The Muslim Brotherhood. It's an astonishing irony. This highlighted part says the strategic framework clearly elucidates the nature of today's domestic challenges, including providing extended assessment of the dangers posed by what? Domestic terrorists, including racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists, and particularly, and I love when government officials use certain words, because I can just picture when they were sitting around a table putting this document together, they stress particularly white supremacist violent extremism. That's coming right out of the mouth of the Muslim Brotherhood, right onto this paper. I can guarantee you, just knowing the way they work. And down at the bottom, the strategic framework emphasizes the importance of transparency and the protections of civil rights and civil liberties and the protection of data in a digital age. This is right back to what I got in so much trouble for. And this is what See Something, Say Something is all about. And it's also what countering violent extremism. So this is a hybrid. This is a concentrated form of all of the policies that have come before under Obama, under Napolitano, under Jay Johnson, concentrated into a new, just released strategy that they're going to put all their effort and focus and attention on white supremacy. And here's some more information on that at the request of DHS. And we're trying to make this clear. This is not passive, accidental, or arbitrary. The Department of Homeland Security, a very agency that I used to work for, that was founded in order to prevent terrorism, is now bringing the very same individuals and organizations into the heart of their policy-making structure and refocusing their efforts on white supremacy, as endorsed and supported by former Secretary now, McAleenan. And here's some more information on that. And I just highlighted this blue part. Today is National Awareness Day for the If You See Something, Say Something campaign. Now, this is September 25th, just about a month ago. And why I brought this up again is I wanted to point something out. In all the years that we've heard see something, say something, we've never actually been told what we're supposed to be looking for or what we're supposed to say if we do see something. But now that problem has been solved because we now have a safe target that everybody can go look for, and there's no risk to making a report on it, reporting somebody, and that is a white supremacist. It's no longer, you remember what happened several times over when people said that they were afraid of reporting their neighbors who happened to be Muslim because they were afraid that they were going to be accused of being racist, biased Islamophobes, remember? Like in San Bernardino? Well, that problem is solved now because it's a safe target to go after white supremacists. And in the middle of it are Muslim Brotherhood front groups that are right there giving the endorsement and the support and the entree, the cachet, the prestige to be, in a sense, partners with DHS as we fight this threat of white supremacy. Well, they've already called President Trump a white supremacist. They call ICE white supremacists. They call law enforcement officers that are attempting to enforce immigration law white supremacists. They call virtually all cops white supremacists. They call anybody that stands up and speaks about the global Islamic movement a white supremacist. So imagine where this would go if somebody among us, all of us together, don't stand up and bring this to attention and ask them to explain what this is really supposed to all be about. And earlier I showed you a report that was submitted by CARE to the House Committee on Homeland Security back in 2013 after the Boston Marathon. Well, if you wondered if it's still going on, the answer is yes. This is the Judiciary Committee on the left. That's Jerry Nadler. Remember him? He's one of the three main members of the House that have committees that are going after President Trump to try to impeach him, Jerry Nadler. Well, his committee is the Judiciary Committee. They just had hearings on President Trump's anti-Muslim policies, AKA the Immigration Enforcement Act that he signed as an executive order clear back like 1 or 2 days after he became president. Well, who is asked to submit a report? Once again, CARE. Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, specifically asked CARE on the 24th of September 2019 to submit a report into the official proceedings of the hearing to the Judiciary Committee. So yes, it's still going on at this very moment. Now, on the right, I mentioned this guy before, is Usama Jamal. He's the person looking down, probably at his cell phone. And there's Erdogan from Turkey. This is September 22nd. Usama Jamal is the chairman of the USCMO, the ones that just met at the State Department, the U.S. Council on Muslim Organizations. Right? So then what happens? We have this faith-based community safety and security symposium, this high level, was attended by Mike Pence, Congressman John Joyce, and Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency Assistant Director Brian Harrell, with several faith-based community leaders for a faith-based safety and security symposium at where? The White House. And who were the people that were at this, sitting literally right next to Vice President Pence? The members of the Muslim Brotherhood. The same people I showed you before. And here's a description of it. This is what I call saturation, like water soaking into a sponge. So my simple question is, why is it 18 years after 9/11 and coming up on 11 years after the Holy Land Foundation trial that known, documented, identified members of Muslim Brotherhood front groups, leaders of them, are being brought in to positions within the federal government to influence policy and then turn around and go out into the community and begin to implement it? Why is it, please tell me, that these individuals are being allowed to literally sit right next to the president, to officials within DHS, within FBI, within the State Department, within the Department of Defense, within the academic community, within the faith community? What is it going to take for us to actually respond to this emerging threat? Just a couple things that I wanted to put as consequences of this new policy. The DOJ, yes, the Department of Justice, is suing the city of Troy and Detroit because they had the audacity to try to enforce their zoning laws. And so CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, filed a suit against the City Council of Troy. And guess who's helping them? The Department of Justice. Specifically, the Civil Rights Division, you see at the bottom of the second paragraph, that Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Division, we have one inside of DHS too. And they're the ones that set up the liaison meetings that brought the Muslim Brotherhood right into the inner heart of my agency, DHS, Customs and Border Protection. So it's not just happening in one agency, it's happening across the broad spectrum, where these Muslim Brotherhood front groups are getting, co-opting, influencing, somehow or another, subtly seducing them into undermining the legal structure of our whole country by going and suing cities because they have zoning laws that prevent putting a public building like a mosque in a particular part of their city. And here's another one. See, it shows you right here that CARE, Michigan, representing the Adam Community Center in the lawsuit, praised the Justice Department's action. Please tell me again, I know I sound like a broken record, but will somebody please explain what it is that a front group for Hamas is doing, partnering with the Department of Justice? And where's all the people that are supposed to know better? That's the part that bothered me the most. Is after all the effort of law enforcement officers like myself to bring this to light, and we still have the highest levels of our government agencies cooperating directly with these people. And then here we all know who this is, Keith Ellison. In response to the new policy that's put out in September of this year by DHS, he's going to turn right around and have a symposium on white nationalism, which of course is a synonym for white supremacy, in St. Cloud, Minnesota, after Trump vows more local control. So what they're doing is they're taking this opportunity and leveraging the new policy of DHS and going after communities in the United States that have the courage or the wherewithal to actually try to stand up and protect their own sovereignty. And this is one last thing. This is an upcoming meeting in December out of Charleston, West Virginia, called Shoulder to Shoulder. And any of you that know about Shoulder to Shoulder know it's a coalition of left-wing organizations, progressive Christian denominations, and lo and behold, the Muslim Brotherhood. In particular, one of the faces of it is Mohammed Majid Ali, who I've already mentioned to you 2 or 3 times, former president of ISNA, a direct high-level representative of the Muslim Brotherhood right here in the United States. And this is, my friends, is the last slide. What are we going to do about it? I already mentioned earlier that you should come and get the PowerPoint, look in the notes, find the link to the letters, go through the list and find a representative, maybe in your state, and give them a phone call. And I would like you to document what you do. In other words, get back with Sharia Crime Stoppers and let them know what kind of a response you got. I am really curious. I would like to know what kind of response you get from your elected officials when you call them and ask them, please explain to me why it is that you're involved with the front group for Hamas. Well, we're not involved. Yes, you are. You write letters in support of CARE, which is proven in the Holy Land Foundation trial to be a front group for Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, and see what kind of a response you get. And then go down to Walmart and buy a case of spinach, because it's time to open the can. Wouldn't you agree? And I think that's the last slide, and I think we're going to go into questions next. Is that right?
Philip, before we do that, why don't you remind us what Popeye would say about all of this? That's why Popeye.
Yeah, I stands all I can stands, and I can't stands no more.
So we all need to grow forearms like Popeye and pull up our big boy pants and get into action. And we'll talk about that. A couple of footnotes real quick, Philip and Mary, just to pick up on this saturation continuing and getting worse. You've got Keith Ellison, as you mentioned. We've also got a situation where mosques are being trained by the FBI on active shooter training. We know that for a fact. One of our attendees was in the room. We also know that the police academy in another county was actually being trained by CIA and other people coming up from Washington, that they need to be concerned about Christian jihad, which is another word for white supremacists, white nationalists. And frankly, the Bloomfield situation, which we talked about in the past, where CARE put pressure and had an event canceled, these are all showing the degree of saturation, and I think just support everything that you're talking about. So it really has gotten worse.
Yeah, and it's a paradox. I admit it. I mean, it's an obvious paradox. You would think that with President Trump, that things would be better. And the only way to explain it is that they'd be a lot worse if it weren't for President Trump. But he's brought every mutant hybrid swamp creature out of the woodwork. I don't think anybody really realized how many there were. And this is the resistance. And of course, the Muslim Brotherhood are masters of manipulation and opportunities to form alliances with the resistance. And that's what they do. That's their full-time job. That's their main occupation. And they form these alliances with leftist, Antifa, progressive leftist socialist groups and work together. They don't really actually have the same end goal, but it helps the Muslim Brotherhood to form alliances with organizations that are seeking to undermine any form of law enforcement or constitutional supporting of the constitutional principles that our country was founded on.
Well,
They
sometimes
want to alter or abolish the current form of government, as it says in the Declaration, and replace it with one that's more suitable to their worldview.
Sometimes we wonder, Philip, whether or not the president, with all the things he's trying to do and all the harassment that he takes, really is aware of some of these things. But it seems to me there's a syllogism here. If white supremacists it sounds like we're not going to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, but it sounds like we just have designated white supremacists as a domestic terrorist threat. Well, some people might say that Donald Trump happens to be white. He happens to be a Christian. He happens to believe he could certainly be called, he's a nationalist. So by definition, I guess you could say that, and I think you did say it, that President Trump could be identified as a white supremacist. Well, his own agency and his own secretary who reports to him has designated that as an enemy of the country. So you could kind of sort of believe that Donald Trump's been designated as a problem that needs to be removed. So how crazy is it that his own organization is indirectly supporting the crazy activity in Washington to remove the president?
And it's not just Donald Trump. It's everybody in his administration. They're guilty. every policy that he ever passed, that's obviously tainted by white supremacy ideology. Every single person, nearly 63 million who voted for him, every single person who has ever benefited by any of his policies and has the courage to actually say so in public, everybody that's not on food stamps now that used to be, everybody who's working now that didn't used to be, anybody of any ethnic group that's improved, standard of living during President Trump's administration, they're also come under the same classification, and that adds up to like probably 70% of the whole country are guilty of either directly being a white supremacist or affiliating with a white supremacist, and therefore are just as guilty by default. And that's why this whole impeachment thing is so I call it ominous, because these are like gears in a transmission. They tend to mesh together. One, the Department of Homeland Security is going after white supremacy as an official policy. No, that's not an exaggeration. It really is true. Meanwhile, you have the entire branch of the government trying to find a way to undermine the election of President Trump. And a lot of what they say, either directly or by inference, is that one of the reasons why he's unfit for office is what? He's a white nationalist, white supremacist, right? And if you're ICE or DHS or CBP or Border Patrol, you're already a white supremacist. How many members of Congress like Ocasio-Cortez or Rashida Tlaib or Ilhan Omar have already said plainly and openly and sometimes obscenely that ICE or DHS or CBP or Border Patrol or white supremacist, racist Nazis? They've already said that, haven't they? Many times over.
I think another way to say it is, if you're a clinger, if you cling to the Bible, if you cling to the Constitution, if you cling to your gun, then
I forgot about the clingers. Yeah, throw them in there.
You're a white supremacist. Well, you know what? We've got so many questions, Philip. Thank you so much. Mary is going to do a good job and get us going on the questions. And I think there's a lot of very educated people in our audience. So, Mary, what do we have for questions?
Well, we've got a lot of questions going, but I had a couple myself. Most of these organizations are 501c3s, and is there any opportunity to hurt them if there was some way we could get that taken away from them? Any thoughts on that?
It's no easy undertaking.
Yeah.
I mean, CAIR has been being challenged on that basis for years now with David Urashalmi and his group. And yes, they've had some success. But we haven't come to the point where there's enough political will, momentum, socially and politically and legally, to really address this. And I hate to think about what else is it going to take?
Right.
I don't even like to think about that, but I would say that whatever you would say when enough is enough, like the Popeye spinach can, when he finally says, I stands all I can stands, and I can't stands no more, well, apparently we haven't come to that point yet. I mean, that's also in the Declaration, that we would rather suffer indignities and not consider changing the government lightly, but there does come a time when we really will say, we're going to have to say, enough is enough. And I'm not talking about some insurrection. I'm talking about using the principles of the Constitution, like Article 6, for example, and finally confronting this wolf in sheep's clothing that keeps getting further and further into the middle of the flock of sheep. Because that's what they are. They may wear suits and ties and be articulate and well-educated and attractive, accomplished people. But the bottom line is they're representing groups like Hamas. Mm-hmm. And you can't get away from the reality of that. These are terrorists in suits. And it's saturation. The water is soaking into the sponge from underneath, like water will do when a sponge is floating around. And if you want to speed up the process, you push on the sponge from above. That's called terrorism. But right now, the water is soaking into the sponge well enough. They don't need to deal with you don't need to resort to terrorism. We're cooperating with them. They're inside FBI, DHS, DOJ, Department of Defense. What else? State Department. Every single branch of the federal government. Every time you turn around, there's prominent members of the Muslim Brotherhood sitting there, literally right next to our own officials, up to and including the vice president, and or giving speeches during the national cathedral, not speeches, leading prayer. 2 days after President Trump was inaugurated was Majid Ali at the National Cathedral leading a prayer. 2 days after. Well, who did the vetting on that? Somebody did not do the vetting on that, obviously, and here we are 3 years later, and they're further saturated now into the sponge than they've ever been.
Are most of the is most of the saturation what I guess I would consider, from your description of them, visitors to the White House, working with people in Congress? You know, if we go back to the Obama administration, they literally named a half dozen of the ones that were his czars. And so do we have people that are literally sitting at a desk in the White House right alongside of President Trump and or his administration that have infiltrated with, you know?
In general terms, it's a good question, because you made me realize something. During the time when Obama, they were mostly outsiders coming in by invitation. Now it's the opposite. Mostly insiders working out, if you will, reaching out. But the end is the same, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're forming these alliances, and they're by invitation. But these alliances and these policies are being initiated by people that are already in positions inside the government. They're part of the resistance, and they will say so quite plainly. They don't believe, you know, in the deepest way of enforcing immigration law. They don't believe that front groups for Hamas really pose a real threat. They've transferred the whole sense of urgency over to a newly defined see something, say something threat called white supremacy.
Yeah.
And now it's like a handle on a suitcase. Now you can go out there and grab a hold of that handle on a suitcase real firmly and identify somebody as a white supremacist and go after them.
Thank you. We have a slew of questions here. Let me see if I can get through them. Mark is asking, what books or video presentations do you recommend for us to take a look at to gain a bigger grasp on the security meltdown?
Well, that's a new phrase, actually. I actually bought the domain on National Security Meltdown, but what books?
Your book, for sure.
Yeah, your book, Center for
As
Security
mentioned,
Policy.
yeah, because I wrote about this several years ago, and the very same people that are in the index of the book are now the ones that are prominent public figures in this effort to undermine the presidency of Trump. I'm talking Clapper, Mueller, Brennan, Comey, Holder, Clinton, that whole roster. They were in the book. You know, right now the book's only available through Kindle. But I'm trying to think of another book. Steve Coughlin's book, Catastrophic Failure.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I look on Front Page a lot, and I look at Jihad Watch a lot. Their blogs, Robert Spencer and his group. The reason why I like them is because they just provide the links to the original sources, and you can go and look at them.
Yep.
But this concept of saturation is kind of a new concept, because before we used the word infiltration, but we hear that word like any word. We hear it so much, after a while become numb to it. It doesn't mean anything. So I thought about it for a long time. I was trying to think of a word that would be synonymous with it, but I say patented. Hasn't been patented by the left yet. And saturation, we can patent saturation, because it is a lot like saturation, isn't it? Water soaking into a sponge. So there's not a lot that's actually been written on it by that, using that descriptive phrase. But if I think of another one or two as we go, I'll mention it.
Vicki is asking, she said she saw a piece of legislation to establish a Department of Peace Building, HR 1111. They also want an interagency committee of peace. So far, the legislation has only been introduced, but it has 35 co-sponsors. Do you know anything about it?
No, is it connected to this whole thing about white supremacy and safety of places of worship?
Yeah, don't know.
Have her, have the person maybe send it to you. We can take a look at it.
Okay. We've got, does Mr. Haney know if does Mr. Haney know if President Trump has a good understanding of Islam and its plans to take over the U.S.?
Well, you mean, after yesterday, I'd say he has a pretty good understanding of at least part of the global threat. But that's part of the paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you have all that what we're talking about is a reality. It's an inescapable reality. These are real people. These are the major players that have been on the stage for quite some time. These are the very same people. I went undercover, I think it was the 16th of December back in, when did President Trump recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel? Was that 2018 or 2017?
Yes, 2018.
So I went there. I went to the protest meeting, march that they had on the South Ellipse, and it was led by none other than the U.S. CMO, the U.S. Council on Muslim Organizations, and there was Nihad Awad and Usama Jamal and all the rest of this same roster cast of characters that I was tracking when I was still active duty. And I was disguised. I had a hat and glasses on, a big coat, and I was literally standing next to them. Literally. And that's pretty weird, to go from tracking people as active duty law enforcement to actually literally standing next to them. And the point I'm trying to make is that when they were at that meeting, they were going like, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, and other slogans that are well known to, you know, be violent.
Yep.
And they, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. And I wrote them all down. I don't remember them all right now, but this is in literal vision of the White House in protest of President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem. What am I trying to say? Those same people, Nihad Awad, Usama Jamal, and the rest of the U.S. CMO that were standing out there chanting from the river to the sea, a year or two later are sitting inside of meetings in the White House, in the DOJ, in the Department of State, in DHS, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what kind of a disconnect is that? How did that happen? Did those I'm not talking about freedom of speech. I guess they have the right to go out there and shout from the river to the sea. That doesn't mean they have a right to sit in the federal government agencies and make policy, especially when their goals are to implement Sharia law ultimately, and progressively, step by step by step, make America more amenable to the goals of Islam. There's a problem there.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree.
And when you see that kind of stuff in real life, you know, you can't get it out of your head. And our co-host knows. He and I did some things together, and he saw it. He'll never forget it, will you?
Actually, that's exactly what I was thinking about as you were talking about it. The crazy thing is these people are talking about sedition. They're talking about violating the Article 6 of the Constitution that you talk about so well, Philip. It is the supreme law of the land, and these people are working inside the government to basically have the Constitution not be the supreme law of the land, to replace it with Sharia. We have never had any indictments. We don't even have any conversations other than a few people like yourself and Claire Lopez and others talking about sedition. This is incredible. It is this Article 6 of the Constitution is being violated all the time because that's their goal. And if the administration only understood and took action about that, they would have grounds for pursuing sedition rather than worrying about the civil rights and civil liberties of these people.
And the greatest proof of that is the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America.
Mm-hmm.
That's an exaggeration, Dick. That's an exaggeration, Philip. They're not really trying to do that. Oh, yes, they are. If they weren't, there wouldn't be a group called the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America, which, as I mentioned earlier, their name in Arabic is Majama Fuqaha al-Sharia be'Amrikia, the group of lawyers promoting Sharia in America. It's right in their name. So don't tell me that they're not trying to find ways of saturating Sharia law into the social structure of America, because they are. And they can say it and they can deny it. But remember Dawood Walid?
Yes.
Was up in Michigan with you?
Stood next to
Came
him.
right out and said in public
Right.
that Muslims in Michigan are already following Sharia law and that they shouldn't apologize for it.
Again, it's sedition. It is violating the supremacy clause of the Constitution, which it says it's the supreme law of the land. So we're talking about white supremacists. We really should start talking about constitutional supremacy. That should be part of our marching orders, is to remind people, like you do, Philip, that we depend on the Constitution and to measure these people's actions against the Constitution, in particular, Article 6.
Yeah, if our best national security policy is not to focus on this thing, supposed white supremacy, is to focus on constitutional supremacy.
Yeah.
You put your priorities in place and a lot of these problems would be solved, wouldn't they?
Yep. Well, let me bring you. Claire's asked us to remind everybody how important it is to identify the deeply detrimental role being played by Ambassador Sam Brownback, who is serving as a vector to bring the USCMO and Muslim Brotherhood figures into the DOS and the White House itself.
Yeah, I've been watching that one since it started with the Alliance of Virtue for the Common Good. And Sheikh bin Baya, who is the global leader of it, is the one who issued a fatwa granting permission for jihadis to kill American soldiers wherever they encounter them in the world. Now he's the face of the Global Alliance of Virtue for the Common Good. And as I showed you in the slide earlier today, they were given front and center billing at the Second Ministerial, which is the premier event of Sam Brownback's effort, job to protect persecuted Christians. How in the world did this organization, who's led by a global level Muslim Brotherhood pro-jihad sheikh from Mauritania that lives in Saudi Arabia, and the Muslim face of the organization here in the United States is Majid Ali, the former president of the ISNA, the Muslim Brotherhood Front Group. How did we get to this point? Why do these same people keep popping up every place we look? And how come nobody seems to have the capacity or the wherewithal to ask a simple question? Who are these people anyway? And now you see part of the reason, and it's not a tangent, it's related. It is a complicated subject, but why it's so dangerous what the Obama administration did when they started deleting the classified information out of our databases. Because what they do is they punch the hole. And this hole, as time goes on, time stretches it bigger and bigger. And there are whole groups, I know from my friends in other federal agencies, that have virtually, the entire system is sterile. You look up Tablighi Jamaat in the U.S. in one of the federal agencies' database, there's nothing, this much, literally zero, nothing. They're totally sterilized, like a desert. There's nothing there, not a little green plant, nothing. And this started back in the Obama administration in my own agency within CBP. They They started deleting the information out of our database, and now it's grown widespread. And this is, you know, closer to what you might call the classified side of the equation. But there's whole databases that have been sterilized of what we call derogatory information that will help us make a decision on whether somebody should be brought into the country or allowed in or not. So the point is, nobody's doing the vetting on these individuals. Sam Brownback is literally shaking hands with people that have already declared openly and affiliated themselves with Muslim Brotherhood front groups that operate on a global level. And it astonished me. I just don't understand the myopia of this whole situation.
So Philip, one quick analysis here. We've got Sam Brownback reports to Mike Pompeo, and for most people, Mike Pompeo is a good Secretary of State. The president sent him over to interact with Erdogan, and that was a good thing. On the other hand, Erdogan is directly meeting with the Muslim Brotherhood, so one has to wonder why Mike Pompeo can't see that back at home, Sam Brownback is meeting with the Muslim Brotherhood, who works with Erdogan, and yet Erdogan has to be dealt with as a complex person in the Middle East associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. It just seems like there's certain walls that will not be crossed, even with good people, presumably like Mike Pompeo.
Yeah, I wish I could answer that. And it's very disturbing, that disconnect. If it's on purpose, if there's a grand master plan to these alliances, then okay, if I take your argument, then show me what good has come out of it. You know, if this is such a brilliant plan to form an alliance with the Muslim Brotherhood, then show me, please, what good has come out of it. I don't think Troy, Michigan thinks that it's a good plan. I don't think St. Cloud, Minnesota thinks it's a good plan. I don't think Basking Ridge, New Jersey would think it was a good plan. Not to mention the people in San Bernardino or Boston or Orlando. I don't think they would think it was a good plan either. How about the ones in Sri Lanka?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not just domestic. But the other infuriating part is that we're arguing about something that was already proven more than 10 years ago. That's the point we have to keep coming back to. It's not like they can say we didn't know. Oh, gee whiz, we missed it. No, it's called the Holy Land Foundation trial. That was the Department of Justice that ran that trial with the FBI and other law enforcement, who actually had a successful verdict and convicted those guys of material support for terrorism, supporting Hamas, and had a nice long list of other affiliated organizations and individuals that were supposed to be brought into court on phase 2 of the trial, but it never happened. Instead, we did exactly the opposite. We decided we needed to somehow form an alliance with those very same people. And if we don't amend this, if we don't address it, there are going to be consequences. We cannot just keep going down the road like we're going without eventually something very serious consequences resulting from it.
Well, here's
it's
a
like
question.
A mathematical formula. You add the variables to the equation, you're eventually going to solve it. And every time you add the variables, you get the same solution every time. It doesn't vary. And we keep dropping more of those variables into the equation. One of these days, pop, it's going to solve itself again, and we're going to be facing another major problem. And then everybody's going to be wringing their hands and asking themselves, you know, what happened? And, oh, there wasn't anything that we could do about it. You know, we did our best. We just didn't get a ping. Like Janet Napolitano. Really, you just threw the entire law enforcement and community under the bus. You don't need a ping to recognize a guy who's a terrorist who's standing right in front of you, if you know what you're doing. So we have an entire federal agency that depends on an electronic ping to tell us, a literal ping, to tell us whether we have a terrorist stand in front of us or not. That's really where we've come to. And we're supposed to accept that as the best that we have. We didn't get a ping. Oh, well, gee whiz, too bad. Maybe next time we will.
Well, we've got a couple questions on the letters, the 102 letters. One was, can you explain the source of where you found those? And the second one is, how do we get the letters so that they can make phone calls?
That's an easy one. Investigative Project on Terrorism put it out.
Okay.
You can either look in the PowerPoint we're looking at now or go on their website and find it. Just query letters from Congress to CARE.
Okay.
Or CARE letters from Congress. And that file has all the letters. You can literally print them all out if you want to. And there's a handy dandy summary list right at the beginning of the 102 letters that shows you the names of every one of the people in Congress that wrote those letters. And meanwhile, I'm still looking for the source of the other cache that I mentioned, the 125 that just came to light vis-a-vis this pending 25th anniversary gala in Washington with CARE. And again, my premise is it's worse because before it was 102, this time it's 125. But that's where you can find it, IPT's website.
Okay, I gave that out. Good. Some folks are asking whether or not Trump has any relationship with CARE. I don't know that we know that, but I mean, from the perspective of even Jared or anyone else close to him?
I've never seen any signs of it.
Okay.
Not even with Jared or anybody in the second and third level. No, I've never seen any indication of that. Now you go to the agency level, then yes. But in the core executive branch, no.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to get a few answered. Let's see what we've got here. Well, one question is Pence getting brainwashed into this Muslim Brotherhood trash? Again,
I don't know. I choose to stay on the side of being optimistic. I think they've got some cards in their hand they haven't played yet. Trump seems to be pretty good at surprising people. Mm-hmm. So if I didn't have some degree of optimism or hope, I probably wouldn't be able to keep doing this. So I will choose to believe that one day, hopefully sooner than later. I mean, after all, look what President Trump's putting up with. I mean, probably what portion of his whole energy you suppose is directed toward the impeachment issue and the pushback from the swamp and the resistance within the federal agencies? I mean, a large part of his energy is taken up, and also his supporters. And just so if he was actually able to have a clear road ahead, it's hard to say where we would be right now, isn't it? So, and I guess I could say that I'm holding out that once we get past all this and we go into the election next year and he is reelected, then that's gonna change the dynamic too.
And that's precisely why they're going to do everything possible to stop him.
That's right, because we're going to try to catch the wave like a surfer and ride that wave all the way to next November. So we're going to be doing these kind of programs right on straight through till next November. I intend to, and I'm pretty sure you do my part to stay up to date, to contribute the abilities and skills and background and experience that I've gained up to now, to focus it on looking ahead toward November and make my contribution to help and protect our liberties and freedoms in our constitutional republic. I'm in till November. I mean, 100%, till we see how this thing, what the American people decide next year. And then we'll go from there.
If we go to talk to our reps, what document can we take to them that would represent the findings of the Holy Land Foundation trial?
Well, you can look up the Holy Land Foundation trial and print out, start with the November 25th, 2008 press release from the DOJ about the results of the trial, the convictions, and the successful outcome. You can also print out some of those letters. You combine the Holy Land trial as the foundation, because that's where that was the, as I said earlier, the turning point. We came right up to the point of contact, and we made a choice, I'll say, as a country, to either go forward and address it or to withdraw from it and turn another way. And we unfortunately withdrew from it and turned away from it. But you start with the Holy Land trial, and then you complement that with real-time current events, like the CARE report to Jerry Nadler's Judiciary Committee. That was just last month. Or MPAC and CARE going to the DHS meeting, which is also just last month. And then just ask the obvious question: how is it that we go from the Holy Land trial that proved irrefutably in federal court that these groups were front groups operating on behalf of Hamas to 10 years later allowing them to come in and have positions of influence and authority within the federal government? How do we get to that point? Don't you believe the Department of Justice knew what they were doing when they had the trial? And that the evidence has never been refuted to this very day? And so take a foundational document and then take a current event document. And then just ask the question, what happened between here and here? Mm-hmm. Why are members of Congress writing letters of an endorsement to a known front group for Hamas? Please explain it, if you can.
Hard one to explain. I think that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and close out.
Okay, we need to do that.
I have a quote I'd like to quote.
Sure.
President Lincoln that maybe we can use to close it out. And that is his second address to Congress in 1862. He says, "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate for the stormy present. That the occasion is piled high with difficulties, but we must rise with the occasion. And that our case is new, so we must think anew and we must act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country, the last best hope on earth."
Well, Philip, you've done a great job of giving us so much information. This is a battle to save our country, and in doing so, to save freedom for everybody on the planet. So let's just review a few things. Philip, stick with us. We've got about 5 or 10 minutes, folks. We want to give you some highlights and then what's coming up. Philip has given us the background. We are now aware, and certainly are absorbing, that we have a new focus. It's the white supremacists, not so much Islamic supremacists. And as we talked about it, how is it that the U.S. government can kill an ISIS leader over there and not recognize the Islamic threat to our personal safety over here? We talk about Iran and Turkey and our enemies specifically over there. Spend lots of time and attention, but we just don't seem to be able to pull the spotlight onto their proxies in America. In America, the proxies of Iran and Turkey include the Muslim Brotherhood, CARE, and Hezbollah, and they're operating here in America, as Philip's talked about. Everyone listening here should be prepared, as we do our job and fight in 2020, to be identified as a white supremacist. Given the definitions of the Southern Poverty Law Center and CARE, we should be prepared to be attacked and silenced, if possible, as a white supremacist, strictly because we're going to support President Trump for another 4 years. Philip has done a good job of reminding us. First Amendment is not really the question here. We're not talking about freedom of religion. We're talking about supremacy. Article 6 says the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and the Sharia and the people that follow Sharia, the Muslim Brotherhood, clearly want to supplant the U.S. Constitution. We should proudly be identifying ourselves as constitutional supremacists when we are attacked as white supremacists. And we should also be identifying ourselves as members of the one team that is involved in the one fight, and that's the fight for the 2020 election with Donald Trump. Mary, take us through a few other action items, if you would, please.
Yeah, we put together action items because so many times on these webinars, people are looking for what can they do. And some of these are fairly simple. Some of these are just ways that people can get active in their own communities with their own legislators, candidates, and even community. So know your candidates, who they associate with. I mean, this is a real research and vetting process. What they stand for, determine their voting history, know what positions they currently hold and have held in the past positions. This is key to who is running for office and in your community and going to be standing possibly in Congress as you're voting with your knowledge and your support. So you need to know who they are. Create discussion points to talk in open town halls whenever available, because a lot of these candidates will hold these town halls, and you need to approach them and ask them specific questions and make them answer, hold them accountable. Hold your own meetings and discussions with friends, colleagues, family, and get the discussion going so that you are prepared for the voting in November of 2020. That is key. Schedule time to talk with your pastors, rabbis. I mean, this is key as well. Determine if they have a role they can play in educating your community. So many of them want to hide or have been taken under, like Phillip described, you know, because the faith community has been. And so talk to them. Find out if they're going to stand for constitutional Judeo-Christian values. So many of them are not anymore. You need to know that. Volunteer to help elect a candidate. If you have done all of your homework on them, have vetted them, then it is required that you need to help get them elected. If they're a true conservative Judeo-Christian candidate, they need your help to be the voice in Congress or in your state. And then join coalitions, find groups and community gatherings that are like-minded to give a stronger voice to the mission that you need to work on. And all of these are simple action items that I think everybody can take on, and even do just one or two of them would be something to focus on for 2020.
Thank you, Mary. And just a footnote on that, make sure that you challenge some of these candidates, even if they say they're Republicans or conservatives. Bring up important policies that you think are important that Donald Trump is in favor of, and see if they understand them and support them. You may find that some of the people who are, quote, GOP conservatives are actually on the wrong side of immigration because of the Chamber of Commerce. So a great list, Mary. Thank you for that. We're going to continue to let you know what's coming on. A week from tonight, we will be speaking with Steve Baldwin, and he's got very specific commentary on the coming soft civil war if Trump is not elected. Very specific things that you would look for and be concerned about if he's not the president in 2021. The following Tuesday, the 12th, we got Dr. Andy Boston, and he's going to be talking about the scourge of Islamic Jew hatred in America and its increases. So those are two additional webinars coming up. And finally, our last webinar Tuesday night for the season is David Boers, our co-founder and a retired police chief, talking about the deceivers that happen to be Muslim women. And that's going to be a very important topic. We do want you to know that this is the webinars, the Tuesday webinars, but we're starting something new. We mentioned it last week. Claire Lopez will be coming forward with a program based on current news. And Make America Think Again is going to be a recurring theme you're going to hear a lot of. This would be her analysis. It'll be a briefer program. It'll be more like 30 minutes, and it's specifically her views on breaking news. She's going to be doing this in 2020 for us. We'll give you a schedule for 2020 starting in January. But in November, we've got two sessions with Claire on the news, the 4th of November, Monday, and the 18th of November, Monday. So again, that would be Monday night next week with Claire Lopez, and then Tuesday night with Steve for the webinar, and on the 18th, again, a Monday-Tuesday combination. So keep that in mind. If you are If you are already registered, you will get that information. You'll get all the reminders. I want to give you a taste for what's coming up in 2020. In addition to Claire Lopez on the news, starting in January, Claire will be with us, but we've also had a great response to last week's guest, Christine Douglas Williams. Christine has agreed to come on a different night, but in the winter season, we will be bringing her in on a bi-weekly basis. We'll give you the full schedule as we fill it out, but Christine has volunteered to join to give us her special insight into the news. Again, in one of these 30-minute news analysis programs we'll be adding to the Tuesday night programs. So in the wintertime, let's say January, February, March, definitely mark your calendars for Tuesdays, but we will be adding these other programs. The Tuesdays will be in-depth webinars with people like Phillip Haney, but we're super excited to tell you, I'm very proud to tell you that Robert Spencer will kick off our winter season with an in-depth Tuesday webinar on January the 14th. We're very, very excited to have Robert. You remember Robert Spencer's banned. He cannot enter the United Kingdom. He took 2 of his sessions in New Hampshire were recently canceled before a third one was brought forward. We are so proud that Robert would like to talk to you on Tuesday night, January the 14th. You'll get notices for all of this activity. The new things with Claire included, all your registration exists, but this is a great time to tell your friends and get them registered so they can participate as we move into the holiday season. It's a great way for your family and friends to get educated and maybe have a constructive conversation over the holidays and be prepared for 2020. Everything we do, all these webinars, of course, continue to be free. We're very, very grateful to Phillip Haney. Phillip, thank you so much for this evening. It's World War III. Phillip, what do you think? Are we winning or are we losing?
Well, there's plenty of reason to hope. Our country's gone through battles before and challenges before. The Constitution is strong enough to preserve our republic if we'll simply lean on it. And all the provisions are there. Our forefathers were geniuses, and they foresaw, virtually every possible way to undermine our republic and build provisions into the Constitution to help protect it. So it's stronger than any physical wall that we could build. So yeah, I have a lot of reason for hope. I know it's a challenge, but I'm not a cynic. I'm more of an optimist, but I know it's going to take a lot of effort too, and we can't do it without everybody's involvement. That's the thing about somebody 2 or 3 weeks ago asked me, Mr. Haney, why should we have hope? Anyway, why should we even have hope at all? I said, because you live in a country that has a form of government that allows you to participate in the protection of your own liberties. When you think about that, that's the reason for hope. And if it gives you even 1% more hope than you had 2 minutes ago before you thought about that, then that's more hope. That's hopeful. We live in a form of government. We have a form of government that allows us to participate in the protection of our own liberties. That's pretty unique in the history of different governments.
Phillip, I want to just comment before we close out, though. There were a lot of comments from our attendees just praising you tonight, thanking you, and just feeling so blessed that from your book and all that you do. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Well, thank you. Do you keep the comments?
They are part of the capture when we close out, yes.
Yeah, it just so happens I was looking at them, and there are a lot of really good points brought up, little tidbits and pieces of information.
Yep.
That all add to the story, don't they?
They do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and again, Phillip, thank you so much, and Mary, and again, thank you to the audience. You are the one team. Your insights, your attendance has just been growing, and we really appreciate that. This is the team that's going to be required to grow and grow and grow winter, spring, and summer and fall of next year. So thank you for joining us. We are part of the United West. Keep that in mind as you think about your end of year giving. We are going to be doing this throughout the year 2020. And thank you, Phil. Thank you, Mary. And thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight. Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Good night, everybody.